our ninth National Vice President, Mr. Louis Gastellum of Globe, Arizona. Mr. Gastellum.
Thank you, Mr. President, and fellow members of the National Federation of Federal Employees. I want to tell you that I just received by air mail the formal report of the Senate Committee on S2875, so if the committee or any committee wanting any questions answered on that bill, they'll know that I have that information available. So I just checked that one feature too, Jack, and it's just as stated. Well, as a member of the National Executive Council, I feel greatly privileged to be able to meet with you folks here in the Northwest. I know that Mike, our new national president, would have been very happy to have been able to be here. He told me of how royally treated he was when he was in the Northwest. He said, boy, those fellows really worked me to death. And I know that any good national leader likes to be worked to death. Whenever you show interest enough to have a national leader such as Mr. Markwood work in your area, we know that you're behind him. So he was greatly impressed not only with the caliber of the state officers of this organization, but with many of the outstanding men who now head the locals of the NFFE. In connection with the subject that I am to speak to you about today, I deliberated considerably as to what I should cover. I knew that you had a number of distinguished speakers here, and that many of the subjects that I could use would be adequately covered. I selected, however, a subject which I think doesn't receive enough attention generally at the local level or at the state level. It isn't that you aren't doing it here, but it's one that I know needs emphasis, because in the position that I find myself where I am, I know how valuable public relations is. Now, this public relations is the most important single basic ingredient to any successful organization. I will try to cover public relations with all people that we deal with. First of all, let me cover the subject of administrators. You will note that I use the word administrator instead of management in this case. I believe we should make a distinction here between the normal employee-management relationship as accepted in private industry and as we operate in the federal government. I prefer to classify top field officials as administrative officials who are governed by the same rules of employment and who are just as much employees as anyone else who is working in the installation. However, no local can really be successful without administrative recognition. It is vitally important that before a local is even chartered, that we discuss the plan with administrative officials and obtain their consent. In our work, there should not be a feeling created that we are working in opposite directions to the top officials. We must all remember that the NFFE prides itself on the advocation of programs that are for the best interest of the public as well as its members. Good administrators are striving towards this same objective. Not only this broad principle, but all administrative officials will benefit from any legislation that we have enacted for employees generally. We can show reluctant administrators where we have benefited them personally if we are only intelligent enough to be well prepared to use our resources of factual data which we have to support our claims. In my agency, for example, the National Park Service, I don't know of a single instance where we make a distinction between top administrators and employees generally. And so far as I know, no hits of installations discourage organization of locals of the NFFE. On the contrary, I know that in most national park offices where there are locals, the top administrative officials always belong. As an administrative official myself, I feel that the better informed the employees are about their rights and the more actively they can participate in improving their lot, the better morale I will have in the organization, and the government and the public will benefit. Another immense benefit to administrators is the fact that good administrative officials have to delegate authority to personnel officers who are directly charged with the responsibility of administering the personnel program within administrative and civil service rules and regulations. I find it a source of gratification to have a local of the NFFE in my unit, since I know that if my personnel program is poorly run, I will hear about it from a group of employees who have the same interest in the final analysis that I have. The personnel officer who also derives benefit from a local in his installation, for he too must depend on line supervisors to carry out the program which he is responsible that it be carried out. With a well-informed and fair-minded group of officers at the head of the local, they can be of immense value to the personnel officer in keeping him informed of serious violations of procedures by line supervisors. The very fact that a local exists in an installation may forestall unfair practices that might have arisen if the local had not been there. In my many contacts for the national organization, I have found that the most cooperative officials are those who are most successful. They are the administrators who recognize that there is nothing about a good personnel program that has to be hidden. They are the people who have confidence that their work is being performed in accordance with all regulations. They are the people who don't resent having an oversight brought to their attention. When you find a reluctant personnel officer or a reluctant administrator who doesn't want to be bothered with a local of the NFFE, you will find that such official has either had a sad experience with a poorly run local, or he is afraid to be constructively criticized for his lack of competence. But I want to emphasize most emphatically that no local should ever be organized with the objective of embarrassing administrative officials. Every local should be organized as stated in our Constitution, and I will quote, "For the purpose shall be to advance the social and economic welfare and education of the employees of the United States and to aid in the perfection of systems that will make for greater efficiency. The methods of attaining these objectives shall be by petition to Congress, by creating and fostering public sentiment favorable to proposed reforms, by cooperation with government officials and employees, by legislation and other lawful means." In the locals I organize, I always emphasize the fact that our main purpose is to support the national program. Sure, we will handle grievances, justified grievances, but I feel that over 95% of all grievances can be settled at the local level, generally with the line supervisor or the personnel officer. Seldom should we even have occasion to go to the head of the installation, for if there are good working relationships between the personnel office and the local, fair men and women can come to an understanding without too much difficulty. And I want to emphasize another point, and that is that you should never capitalize on giving notorious publicity to a case where you beat out the personnel officer on a decision or the administrator. There is nothing that could be more damaging to the future in that organization than to create a feeling of antagonism. In your contact with top officials, point out to them that the greater the support of the local from above, the better chances there will be to attract to the membership the caliber of leaders who will recognize the problems. I mentioned a while ago about National Park Service. We find in almost every instance where we have a local in the national park or a regional office in a national park area, that the people who run the locals are the people who really know all problems of management as well as employees. They're leaders in their own right, and good leaders in federal employment make good leaders for the National Federation of Federal Employees. I don't say that people who are not in leadership positions should not aspire to office, but we have means of training many people in the NFFE, in the positions of vice president, secretary, treasurer, and quite often people who accept positions in the National Federation of Federal Employees display such leadership qualities that your administrators can't help but recognize those qualities, and consequently, as a result of serving in the NFFE, they are promoted to leadership positions in the agency itself. I note, for example, that the Civil Service Commission now recognizes the same general philosophy in working with the agencies to obtain its objective of compliance with regulations. I can remember several years back, and I'm sure that there are many of you here who also remember, that we used to look with a certain amount of fear when a civil service inspector was going to hit our installation. We tried to hit all our skeletons in a closet so he wouldn't question them. And the reason was that that inspector used to believe that he had to find something wrong with the organization to justify his position. Now, that situation no longer exists. Under the leadership, I believe, first under Arthur Fleming, the Commission developed the idea that we're working towards the same objective. They come to an agency, and if they find a minor discrepancy, they will help you correct it and take exception only on major problems. So they recognize that. My own agency, I remember in the days when I was in the accounting department and the auditors used to come. They figured you were a crook before they ever got there. And any minor discrepancy that they found, they would really warm up. And they think that if you make one mistake like that, that you had 1,000 more, and they really dig in to try to find those other discrepancies. Now, the situation has changed. People come in there with the objective of helping each other to solve the problems. They are the very same things that I'm trying to advocate, that we sell administrators, I won't use the word management, administrators, on what we can do for the organization. Now, let us consider for a moment, before I leave this particular angle of relations with administrators, that there is a great deal of precedent to the attitude that prevails upon administrative officials. Some of the trade unions have pitted class against class. They have advocated long and unreasonable sit-down strikes against their employers. They have unmercifully criticized management representatives. And so management officials, unfamiliar with our type of organization, reacts immediately unfavorable towards the prospect of having to go through similar experiences in his installation. So let us be patient and understanding and not lose hope if on initial contact with top officials we are unsuccessful. There is always a tomorrow, and that tomorrow may come under the next subject that I will discuss here. That is relations with the press, radio, and public. Now, there is no single avenue of more effective information in this country than the press, radio, and television. It is surprising how often an individual will believe what he reads in the paper, but he will not believe the same thing if you tell him, even though the fellow that releases a story to the paper might be the very individual that tried to sell the individual in the first place. Intelligently handled, you will find the press radio and television channels most receptive and cooperative. Every local should make it a point to have a strong public relations committee to become acquainted with local editors, radio and television authorities. Top administrative officials who are members make excellent press representatives. Mr. Reed told you yesterday how important it is that we explain our work to our neighbors. Mass means of communication are very effective in telling our story. Several years ago, while I was president of the Santa Fe local of the National Federation of Federal Employees, I encountered a very hostile press against federal employees. Regular editorials condemning the federal employees appeared in the leading newspaper. I began taking exception to such tactics by writing to the editor. Within a very short time, the editor was appointed to a committee by the Chamber of Commerce to see about the possibility of attracting federal agencies to Santa Fe. The first person he thought of was the fellow who had written several retorts to his editorials. He called me up and asked that I come to his office, and he explained to me his project. The first thing I told him was that I could not imagine how any federal official would think of recommending the community if he knew that the local press was antagonistic towards federal employees. I told him that any time the dignity of the individual was questioned, his whole spirit deteriorates and production suffers. Before I left his office, he was convinced that I was right, and he promised henceforth to give us a better break. Now, subsequent to that time, we sponsored a series of open houses at the various installations, and this same editor had nothing but praise for the federal employee. In conjunction with our open house, we sponsored a series of Know Your Government radio talks over the local radio station. Here we asked each of the heads of the agencies to give factual information about his agency, and we received wholehearted support from all officials. This program had the effect not only of acquainting the general public with our work, but also in cementing relations with top agency officials. As a result of this public information program, our Santa Fe local is one of the most stable, has good leadership, and is supported by practically every top official, in most cases by actual membership in the local. Now let me show you how effective this program was. It was about the time that Remspecht was heading the commission, and they decided that something had to be done to tell the public about the federal employee, to counteract all of the unfavorable publicity we were receiving as a result of a few things that federal employees had done that brought notorious publicity to the public service. We had just concluded this program, or we were carrying it on in Local 41, and Civil Service Commissioner Jimmy Gush of the 10th Civil Service Commission came into Albuquerque. He took it up with the Federal Personnel Council of how important it was for us to tell the public what our program was about. It happened that I was vice chairman of the Federal Personnel Council at the time, so I told Mr. Gooch what we were doing in Santa Fe. He says, I'd like to have a summary of just what you're doing in Santa Fe, because I'd like to tell the commissioner that we are already carrying on that program here. I said, Mr. Gooch, I said, this isn't being sponsored as a federal employee. This is being sponsored as a project of the National Federation of Federal Employees local in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Oh, he says, I don't care. He says, who's sponsoring? He says, the fact is that it's being done within my region, and I want to receive credit for that work. And then almost the next week after I had that contact, Guy Numbers, who was then personnel director of the Department of the Interior, came to the regional office there, and he gave us quite a talk about the need to inform the public on what the federal agencies were doing to counteract all this unfavorable publicity. It was really getting people in Washington worried. So again, I explained to Mr. Numbers that what we were doing there in Santa Fe, and I gave him copies of many of the talks that had been presented by the various top agency officials, and he said, gee, I'd like to know I'd like to have that information, he says, so I can tell the Federal Personnel Council in Washington what the Department of the Interior is doing in the field. So there again, I told him that it was not a program that was being sponsored. I wasn't sponsoring that program as a personnel officer of the National Park Service, but as president of Local 41 of the National Federation of Federal Employees. Well, he says, I don't care, he says. The fact is that someone from the Department of the Interior thought out the program and is carrying it out, and I want the Department of the Interior to get credit for being on his toes about it. So it's a natural, folks, and I don't see any reason why you people cannot get a tremendous amount of publicity, good relations with your top administrators by just going to your radio station. It only takes a few minutes, and I assure you that they will give you support on it. I have never found reluctant people when it comes to trying to present them a program that I can convince them is in the public interest. Think of it, at Portland you have 8,000 federal employees, for example. I don't know how many there might be in Seattle, Washington. Probably 10,000 federal employees there. Now you mean to tell me that the radio station is not going to be receptive, or the television station is not going to be receptive to learning something about the activities being carried by 10,000 federal employees there? That they will not be interested when they are paying the salaries of those employees? There's a tremendous field for good information there. And you can do that without any cost to the national organization, just by good local relations with the press. Talk about a national advertising program, and it cost $50,000 to spread a page in one of the large magazines. Why, that's unthinkable. But right there, it's before you. That mass means of communication is available to you if you will just try to take advantage of it. I'd like to see the officers of the Washington State Federation follow through on that and see that each of the locals establish a good public information program, because that's the thing that's going to get you membership, folks. It's going to ever be so much easier for you to go out and talk to an employee if he has heard about your organization through this mass means of communication that the American public has come to think of just as much as they think of the 3 meals a day. Now, relations with your members. Remember that the strength of our organization lies in the support of our membership. When we recruit a member, let us tell him the facts. Never guarantee him anything we can never expect to get for him. There are many employees who will ignore our organization until they're in trouble, and then they will come to us and say, if you'll fight my case, I'll join the union. Beware of such prospects, for 9 times out of 10, if he really believed in our movement, he would have joined before. Also 9 times out of 10, whether you win or lose his case, he'll drop his membership. And 9 times out of 10, you'll lose the respect and confidence of administrative officials if they learn you recruited a member merely for the purpose of embarrassing them. By all means, give recognition to individuals for the work they do. There are awards that can be made for acquiring 5 or more members. Thousands of members who merit recognition and encouragement are not recognized by locals. We are sometimes inclined to give very special recognition to an individual who may bring 40 or 50 members, but we overlook 10 or 20 members who bring in 5 or 10 members each. The result is that these larger number of hard workers develop the attitude that their efforts, which may have been just as great, though less productive, are not appreciated. I am happy to learn that the Washington State Federation recognizes the value of giving recognition to outstanding members. As I have observed that you will present several awards at this convention for meritorious service to members. That is an excellent program, and I believe it should be endorsed by all organizations of the NFFE. Now, folks, I have taken a great deal of time to outline my thoughts on this subject of public relations. I have not try to bring out any problem on legislation, because that is something that you people know what's going on. You're perfectly competent to put it across. I wanted to be sure that the emphasis of my statement on public relations was not lost by going on into other subjects that a lot of people here can discuss after I leave. And before I conclude, I want to tell you that I'm very much impressed with the fine leadership that you have here in the state of Washington. I'm particularly impressed with what appears to be the unity that's behind this movement. And I hope that you will go united to the National Convention so that our organization may continue to grow, and that when we leave Louisville next September, that we will go home with the feeling that we now know our new national leaders, and that we will work for them united as we are here today. Thank you very much for the opportunity given me again.
Thank you, Louis. Thank you, Mr. Gastellum. We enjoyed it.
End of recording. Turn reel over for continuation.